not lose sight of these staggering statistics, but worse still, Russia's battlefield setbacks have led it to cynically targeting energy infrastructure, putting millions of people at risk of sickness and death in cold, unsanitary conditions. Take, for example, the besieged city of Bakhmut, where there are no fewer than 7,000 residents, 1/10 of the original population, who for the last 9 months have been hiding in basements without clean water, electricity or gas, and minimal connection to the outside world. From the scale of Russia's attacks, it is clear that they have not limited themselves to military targets. Their purpose is simply to terrorise the local population into submission. That conclusion is the only one that can be drawn when you look at Russia's ever-expanding charge sheet of international humanitarian law violations. As of the 2nd of April, there have been 788 attacks on healthcare facilities, hospitals, clinics, medical centres. There have been instances of damages to educational facilities, schools, daycare centres, and even nurseries. Meanwhile, Russia has plundered crops and agricultural equipment on an industrial scale, destroying grain storage and handling facilities. According to estimates from the Kyiv School of Economics, Russia stole or destroyed 4.04 million tons of grain and oilseeds, valued at $1.9 billion, in Ukrainian territories during the 2022 season alone. And the Kremlin's continued intransigence is contributing to the current backlog of grain exports. Besides this, Russia has bombed industrial facilities, including the Azot chemical plant, risking toxic industrial chemical release and environmental impact. It has attacked Ukraine's largest refinery at Kremchuk on at least 3 occasions. It has bombed airfields, ports, roads and railway networks, preventing refugees from fleeing the danger. It has taken out communication networks affecting banks, internet and cell phones, with residents in some areas now forced to barter for food. And Kremlin strikes on substations, power plants and power lines have impacted water treatment facilities, leaving cities like Mariupol without water and reliant on delivery bottled supplies. At the same time, Russia has forcibly occupied and undermined the safe operation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe. As Rafael Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, has said, every single one of the IAEA's crucial 7 indispensable pillars for ensuring nuclear safety and security in an armed conflict has been compromised. He recently warned the situation around the plant was potentially dangerous. And sadly, so far, at least 23,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed or wounded, although the actual figure is likely to be substantially higher. Thousands of citizens have been sent to sinister filtration camps before being forcibly relocated to Russia. Some 6,000 children, ranging in ages from 4 months to 17 years, are now in, quote, re-education camps across Russia. The UN, as well as US investigators, have found that Russia has committed war crimes with reported evidence of executions, torture and sexual violence in civilian areas. In early April, President Zelensky said more than 70,000 Russian war crimes had been recorded since Putin's invasion. The names of Bucha and Izium have been synonymous with mass murder. The world will not forget the bombing of the drama theatre in Mariupol, where 1,200 civilians sought shelter under a giant sign reading "Children." No matter how much Russia tries to hide and bulldoze over the scene, we will not forget. Even in the territories Russia has illegally annexed, citizens find themselves subjected to excesses, the worst excesses of totalitarianism. A Russian passport is increasingly essential to access vital services, a nightmare for those with newborn babies. Civilian infrastructure, such as healthcare facilities, are being seized and repurposed to treat wounded servicemen. Kill lists of civic leaders have been drawn up, citizens executed in cold blood, and concerted attempts made to erase Ukrainian culture, history and identity. Mr. Speaker, we should be clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the targeting of civilians and infrastructure essential to the civilian population of Ukraine has not happened by accident in the fog of war. Much of it was planned Russian policy. Russia has fallen. We've seen that handiwork in Syria. In March, President Putin himself was indicted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. But we should also be clear, as numerous credible reports indicate, Russia's morally bankrupt approach might have been made in the Kremlin, but is often carried out willingly, not just by rogue units, but by the ordinary rank and file across Russian armed forces. An even clearer picture of Russia's barbaric approach emerges when we look at some of the weapons they are using against innocent civilians. I'm not referring here to the extensive strikes against Ukraine's electric power network from cruise and surface-to-surface missiles, or even the use of short-range ballistic missiles like the Iskander, which infamously hit the train station in Kramatorsk, killing 60 and wounding more than 110, or even the use of two 500-kilogram bombs dropped by Russian fighter aircraft on that theatre in Mariupol. The fact is, Russia has used cluster munitions with wholesale regard for human life and civilians. They have been dropped near a hospital in Valuda, a 9M79 series Tokcha ballistic missile delivering a 9 N123 cluster munition warhead killed 4 civilians and injured 10, including 6 healthcare workers. It has used Smerch cluster munition rockets in 3 neighbourhoods in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, resulting in reports of 9 civilian deaths and 37 injuries, according to the United Nations. Russia also relies on mass fires. Indiscriminate artillery bombardments to built-up areas account for the vast majority of civilian casualties, injured or killed. And Moscow makes extensive use of conventional anti-personnel mines and improvised booby traps to indiscriminately harm civilians. Dead bodies, the homes and vehicles of Ukrainian civilians, and even children's toys have been rigged as lethal devices. Russia has laid mines remotely and mechanically, covering significant areas of farmland with scant evidence of either marking minefields or warning civilians about their presence. These minefields will leave a legacy long after the conflict ends. Russia has used hundreds of Iranian-made Shahid drones to attack targets in Ukraine. Loitering munitions sent on numerous suicide missions have repeatedly taken their toll on civilians. Last week, these weapons struck a university campus in Odessa, and once more civilians were in the crosshairs in Kyiv. Mr. Speaker, from the start I've been clear that our support for Ukraine is responsible, calibrated, coordinated and agile, aligned and united with the international community. We are helping the Ukrainians defend their homeland. Most importantly, it is responsive to Russia's own actions. None of this would have been necessary had Russia not invaded. But now it is about pushing back their forces and deterring them from committing yet more crimes by holding the Russian military establishment to account for their actions. In December, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wrote to Russian Defence Minister Shoigu and set out the UK government's objection to the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, and that further attacks, contrary to international humanitarian law, for example, the principle of distinction codified in Articles 48, 51 and 52 of the Additional Protocol to the Geneva Conventions, would force me to consider donating more capable weapons to Ukraine so they may better defend themselves within their territory. Unfortunately, Russia has continued down this dark path. This year, Russia's leadership has continued to systematically target civilians and civilian infrastructure with bombs, missiles and drones. More medical facilities were targeted in January than the previous 6 months combined. It has bombed power facilities in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lviv, Zaporizhzhia, Odessa and Odessa Oblast. Incidents of civilian casualties have increased, especially areas close to the front lines such as Kherson and Bakhmut. In January, a block of flats in Dnipro was wiped out by a 5.5-ton Russian kitchen missile, probably causing 124 casualties, including 45 fatalities. In March, a 5-story apartment block in Zaporizhzhia was attacked with an S-300 missile, almost completely destroying the building. And between April the 27th and May, Russian forces conducted strikes against Ukraine using Kh-101 and Kh-55 long-range air-launched cruise missile. Despite Kremlin claims that it is targeting Ukraine's military industrial facilities, one of the buildings struck was a 9-story apartment building. The salvo left 23 dead and dozens more injured. Last week, Russia's shelling struck residential buildings, and on Monday they bombed a Red Cross warehouse full of humanitarian aid. And drone footage from Bakhmut appears to show white phosphorus raining down on the city ablaze. The use of such incendiary weapons, which burn at 800 degrees Celsius, with concentrations of civilians, is a contravention of Protocol 3 of the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I've said many times in the past, we simply will not stand by while Russia kills civilians. We have seen what Ukrainians can do when they have the right capabilities. In recent days, 30 Shahid drones have been shot down. The Ukrainian Air Force says 23 out of 25 cruise missiles fired from sea and land have been downed, and we have had confirmation that Lieutenant General Oshchuk, the Ukrainian Air Force commander, that even Russia's much vaunted Killjoy air-launched hypersonic missile has been brought down. And that is why, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister and I have now taken the decision to provide longer-range capabilities. In December, I informed the House that I was developing options to respond to Russia's continued aggression in a calibrated and determined manner. Today, I can confirm that the UK is donating Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. Storm Shadow is a long-range, conventional-only precision strike capability. It complements the long-range systems already gifted, including HIMARS and Harpoon missiles, as well as Ukraine's own Neptune cruise missile and longer-range missions elsewhere gifted. The donation of these weapon systems gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves against Russia's continued brutality, especially the deliberate targeting of Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, which is against international law. Ukraine has a right to be able to defend itself against this. The use of Storm Shadow will allow Ukraine to push back Russian forces based within Ukrainian sovereign territory. I'm sure the House will understand that I'm not going into further details of the capabilities, but while these weapons will give Ukraine new capability, members should recognise that these systems are not even in the same league as the Russian AS-24 Killjoy hypersonic missile or Shahed Iranian one-way attack drones, or even the Caliber cruise missile with a range of over 2,000 kilometres, roughly 7 times that of a Storm Shadow missile. Russia must recognise that their actions alone have led to such systems being provided to Ukraine. It is my judgment as the Defence Secretary that this is a calibrated and proportionate response to Russia's escalations. Mr. Deputy Speaker, travelling through that country, as I have done several times since the invasion, you see the smashed buildings and the piles of rubble where once there were thriving businesses and homes full of life. They reveal the truth of Russia's invasion, their needless destruction and their gratuitous violence, their continuing violations despite warnings of international law and the deliberate targeting and killing of civilians. They are the visible and tragic symbols of the Kremlin's desperation. Try as they might, the Kremlin cannot hide the fact that their invasion is already failing. They can only occupy the rubble left by their destruction. At this week's Victory Day parade all it did was showcase this historic failure. It demonstrated Putin's efforts to twist the Soviet Union's sacrifice against the Nazis was an insult to their own immortal regiment. It was the facade of power, a distraction from the faltering invasion, the appeal to unity while even Russia's own leadership loses confidence, the hypocrisy of claiming victimhood while waging a war of their own choosing. The reality is, this is the war of President Putin's own choosing, at the expense of Ukraine's sovereignty and its civilian lives. Mr. Speaker, as you know, the UK stands for values of freedom, the rule of law, human rights and the protection of civilians. We will stand side by side with Ukraine. We will continue to support them in defence of their sovereign country. I commend this statement to the House.
John Healy.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are united in our determination to help in the defence of Ukraine and of our shared values. And I welcome the Defence Secretary's statement, his first statement to the House on Ukraine since January, the first announcement of new weapons to Ukraine since February. We welcome this vital new military support as the Ukrainians prepare for their expected counter-offensive. Mr. Deputy Speaker, speaking in The Hague last week, President Zelensky said, "We're not attacking either Putin or Moscow. We're fighting on our own territory, defending our villages and towns." And today's announcement of UK Storm Shadow missiles will strengthen Ukraine's fight to repel the Russian forces and to defend against the brutal attacks the Defence Secretary has spelt out in detail today. Can I ask him, what are the limitations put on the use of these longer-range missiles? How have they been integrated with Ukrainian planes? And will other NATO allies now follow with similar support? Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was 6 months ago, as the Defence Secretary has said, when he told this House he was open-minded to sending longer-range missiles. And 3 months ago, in February, the Prime Minister said the UK will be the first country to provide Ukraine with longer-range missiles. So as I asked in my urgent question 2 weeks ago, why has this taken so long? Ukraine needs all military aid on the front line now. And President Zelensky said last night, and I quote, "Not everything has arrived yet. We're expecting armoured vehicles." So can I ask the Defence Secretary, have all the 10 types of UK armoured vehicles pledged to Ukraine now been delivered into Ukraine? And the Defence Secretary is right. Putin proclaimed in the Victory Day parade in Moscow this week, "Here is to our victory," he said, when he can't disguise and he can't distract from his failure in Ukraine. But despite this, Russia is far from a spent military force, and the next few weeks and few months will be critical. I'm really proud of British military leadership over the last year on Ukraine. I want, in 6 months' time, to be able to say the same. We want the UK's momentum for Ukraine to be maintained and accelerated. So when will we see the 2023 action plan for Ukraine, which the Defence Secretary promised last August? Why has no equipment bought by the UK-led International Fund for Ukraine been delivered to Kyiv 9 months after this scheme was set up? When will ministers designate the Wagner Group as a terrorist organisation, as Labour has argued since February with support on both sides of the House? Why is the government still refusing UK support for a special tribunal to prosecute Putin? And who in government is responsible for leading, integrating and coordinating the UK's backing for Ukraine? Now, the Defence Secretary knows that the government has had and will continue to have Labour's fullest support in military aid to Ukraine and in reinforcing NATO allies. NATO has overhauled its defences since Putin invaded Ukraine, and the Chief of the Defence Staff yesterday welcomed new NATO regional plans. Can the Defence Secretary confirm today the UK will fulfil in full our obligations in these plans? And finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the British public are still strongly behind Ukraine. They want the UK to continue our support, to confront Russian aggression and to pursue Putin for his war crimes. We must and we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for his and his party's support, and he knows as much as anyone of all our determination to see this through. And I think it has been an exemplary example of Parliament at its best over this last 440 or 50 days of this Russian invasion. I will try and seek to answer many of his questions and get straight to the point. On limitations, obviously we will not in public talk about if there are any limitations. The key here is to give Ukraine that capability to defend itself. What I can say is throughout this process we always make sure we gift having examined minimising escalation and provocation unnecessarily to the Russian state. That is not the business we are in. We are in the business of helping Ukraine defend itself within its sovereign territory. And of course, it is easy to forget that, of course, none of this would be needed. No deep strike capability would be needed if Russia withdrew its forces to the other side of the border back into Russia, and every Russian force would be safe after that. But of course, that is why we are seeking deep fires within Ukraine, for example, because Russia have invaded so far deeply into another country. On integration of the plane, of Storm Shadow is an air-fired missile. He is correct. It is, of course, not easy to take a British, French missile and incorporate it on a former Soviet or a Russian aircraft. That has been one of the reasons for the time, is working out if it is technically feasible, and I would like to pay tribute to our scientists and our technicians who have done an amazing job, not just with this type of capability, and actually other scientists across Europe who have managed to produce integration of Western weapons into Russian equipment, or indeed some innovative capabilities at a speed that I often question why I can't have that speed when I domestically try and commission some of those capabilities. So there are lessons there, but that is one of the areas. I'm not sure there is many other powers with similar weapon systems for similar support. There is, however, a drive by many allies to deliver further deep capability. HIMARS is obviously 80 to 90 kilometres, but also there is another American system that was gifted a few months ago, forgive me, I can't remember its name, that has a longer range. And also in the International Fund, one of our requirements in the second round is deep fires, deep strike, the ability to do that as well. It took long, Mr. Deputy, partly because of the technical feasibility. Taking effectively a sort of fifth or fourth generation weapon system and putting it sometimes on second or third generation aircraft is not easy, and we will see. They are not, I'm not going to comment on when we expect these to be used, but nevertheless they have yet to be tested, and we will soon find out, or maybe in the next few weeks or months we'll find out to the extent that has worked, but that takes time. Secondly, as I've always reassured the House, I wanted to calibrate our response. We need to make sure that we do these things in line that helps Ukraine further its capabilities. Gifting these earlier when we were unsure whether they necessarily work, and indeed without any form of offensive on the horizon, may not have made them vulnerable, but B, may not have made the difference that we're all trying to achieve. So all I can say now is, having technically cleared the hurdles, and as everyone talks about an expected counteroffence, now is the right time to gift these to Ukraine, and they are now going into or are in the country itself. On momentum, I would say that no one should doubt any of our momentum here. Yes, the media comes and goes and covers different aspects of the world, and Sudan comes along. But I think if you look at the government's track record in either its gifting, its training, Interflex, which we went from 9,000 last year, we're training 20,000 this year around the country in the United Kingdom, the gifting of the tanks at the beginning of the year, our momentum continues. And on that question about what has gone in the country, I'm certainly confident. I know that all our tanks have gone into the country, many of our Spartans, many of our armoured vehicles. I don't know if every single one has, and I'm happy to write to the right honourable gentleman, but the big ones, like the tanks, they are all in country. They have trained, exercised, both here but then in Ukraine. And I know that the Ukrainian forces using them so far have enjoyed them very much and talk very highly of the challenges, and that also goes to the AS90s that have not only been put in, but I think they've also been used as well. I think there's another lesson there. They seem to get excellent availability on the AS90, so the lessons to be learned in our capability. On the Wagner Group designation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of course, prescribing an organisation is a matter for the Home Office, done via collective right round. I can't comment on when and how those things happen. We've obviously heard the calls from both sides of the House to prescribe it. Wagner is a thoroughly a nasty organisation, not only from what we see in Ukraine, but what we see in West Africa, and indeed we've seen in Syria, and does pose a threat to the United Kingdom and her allies, either directly or certainly indirectly, and it is a group that needs dealing with, although Mr. Prigozhin seems to be making himself deeply unpopular with the leadership in the Kremlin at the moment, and if I was him, I wouldn't stand near any open windows at the moment if I'm dealing with Mr. Putin. But nevertheless, Wagner is here and we have to deal with it as well. On the regional plans, I am trying. The regional plans are over 3,000 pages long and also written in NATO speak, which probably makes them the equivalent of 12,000 pages long when you try and decipher them. It is very important that we try and both make our commitments that meet those plans and also support others if they don't have that capability, because the strength of NATO will be, can it carry its political determination into a military plan that makes a difference and deters, because that's what we're really about, deterring Russia or any other aggressor. So there is a few more weeks and months to go, but I'm absolutely wading my way through the 3,000 pages to see where in the action plan, and after this statement I'm off to the Army on Salisbury Plain to discuss exactly that.
Ms. Elwood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could I very much welcome this statement? I've just returned recently from Ukraine. There's massive appreciation for what Britain has been doing and continues to do, not just from the government with its lethal aid, but also from the British people with the humanitarian support that's been gifted as well. There's huge anticipation about the counterattack that's likely to take place, but also a message which I hope the Secretary would agree that it may require a second, third or fourth counteroffensive to take place. This isn't going to end simply when the Ukrainians decide to push forward, and we should expect Russia to go ugly, to use unconventional systems in response. On Storm Shadow, could I welcome this? Yet again, Britain stepping forward. Are the Americans going to match with ATACMS? And could he spell out the fact that there's still a request for jets to be gifted as well? And finally, Trump last night refused to say that he wanted Ukraine to win. This is a material factor because he could necessarily win the United States election next year, and this might be what Putin is banking on. Thank you.
Yes, my right honourable friend's characterisation of the counteroffensives is correct. I don't think there is a single, one last thrush and everything's over by thrust by Christmas. I think this is a matter of Ukraine quite rightly finding and exploiting, as any good general would, weaknesses or indeed opportunities. So I think we should always manage our expectations that it is not all over by Christmas. And when you have a Russian army that doesn't mind sacrificing hundreds of thousands of its own people, you're up against not such rational leadership that would recognise, as anyone else would do, that the game is up already. When you lose 10,000 armoured vehicles and over 250,000 dead or wounded of your own soldiers, most people would have recognised the game is up. So that is one of the big challenges. Look, there are other, obviously, weapon systems that Ukraine asked for, and the ATACMS is a well-documented capability. We're pretty confident that the Storm Shadow will plug some of that gap and definitely deliver the deeper range that HIMARS used to achieve when it was at 80 kilometres, but the Russians, after suffering significant losses to HIMARS, obviously worked out and moved beyond range rings. So we think the Storm Shadow will absolutely help the Ukrainians make that difference as well. And on the US president today is President Biden. I have a good relationship with him, so does the government as well. They have stood firm, $87 billion worth of donations. They put their money where their mouth is. They have huge amounts of effort gone into their support. I lived in America for a few years, or my parents did. I know that the decent and good people of America would recognise that their rights are just as important as the people's rights of Ukraine, and whoever comes next to the president, their constitution upholds rights. I think that is what will unite them, and I'm confident that whoever comes next will continue to support the battle to uphold human rights.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for a very detailed statement and advance sight of it, and to assure him that the SNP condemn and will continue to condemn Putin's unprovoked invasion of a peaceful democratic neighbour in the strongest possible terms. Can I join with the Labour front bench in asking for, once again, the UK Government to formally prescribe the Wagner Group as a terrorist organisation? And could the Secretary of State take back to his colleagues in all departments that we would like to see a plan to support Ukrainian refugees to seek damages against the Wagner Group in the UK courts? And could he also, given that he mentioned Iran, I would also add that the government should be considering prescribing as a terrorist organisation the IRGC as well. Could the Secretary of State tell us that President Zelensky has said that Ukraine is constrained by delays in the delivery of armoured vehicles, and what action plan is the government, along with its allies, making sure that those armoured vehicles are delivered to assist in those efforts? And finally, could the Secretary of State comment on reports that India imports of Russian oil has risen tenfold in 2022, and what does the government plan to do alongside allies to ensure that oil products originating from Russia do not reap record profits?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I'm grateful for the SNP support on this. I think we all recognise what Ukraine is fighting for, and it appeals to all of our decency and how we must stand up for it. His suggestion of Wagner Group in the financial penalty or the suing in the courts is an interesting one, and it does slightly remind from my previous days as Security Minister, prescription is an important tool, but it rarely unlocks any more than a sort of brand, a labelling of something. The thing that will go for Wagner will have a bigger impact will be suing in the courts, I suspect, given mercenaries, if they don't get paid, don't hang around and seeking damages through our amazing court system, whether that is in Scotland or London, is where it's world renowned for being fair and respected, has a long tentacle. So I listened to his suggestion. While I can't advise the victims of Wagner Group, I certainly think hitting Wagner in the wallet will certainly probably have a stronger method, even though prescription, I hear, is also wanted. And I also listened to the IRGC call. Iran is absolutely supplying Russia with drones. It can't hide it, it can't pretend it. It is supplying Russia with drones. And of course, Russia in return is funding the Iranian and the IRGC to make those drones and that industry, and that poses a wider threat to the region, whether that is to Yemen, Saudi Arabia, the Houthis, Iraq, where we see Iranian drones being used already, and there's no good shall come of it, shall we say, on that. As far as delays go, one of the assistance we do, we have people in Poland and Slovakia and Romania helping coordinate delivery and helping the logistics of it. We stand by to help any other nation do that. And I'm very happy at our next meeting of colleagues, either at NATO defence ministers or other, to find out who's having a difficulty, and we stand by ready to help. One of the things not written about what we do in Ukraine, some of the great work we've done, is in things like logistics, flying aircraft to pick up people's donations and bringing them back to the hubs. All of those people are heroes to me. They're members of the RAF, will be flying their airplanes. We do it often, in a sense, not secretly, just, the media don't seem to want to write about it, but I know about it, and I think it's a really good work by doing it. So we'll keep the momentum, we'll keep the supplies coming in, but I think we should all recognise, and if any of you has visited the Ukrainian training, there's a lot of hardship still to come.
Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I welcome the delivery of Storm Shadow because we must do all we can to even the odds for our Ukrainian friends who faced a well-armed terrorist state. However, I am concerned that at this point, while we have not managed to suffocate Putin's war machine, yes, we need to deliver military aid, but we also need to make sure that we suffocate the finances that allow Putin to continue to wage this war. So can I urge my right honourable friend to lobby the Chancellor to establish an economic Rammstein of G7 Treasury ministers or allied nations who can come together and make sure that economically we are doing what is needed to stand up the phenomenal war effort being led by my right honourable friend and all of our allies around Europe.
I'm grateful to my friend. I think it's a good idea, and I'll definitely pass that on to the Chancellor. I mean, they have done already work through the G7 with the oil cap, but she's absolutely right that Russia needs funding. It needs to sell its oil and gas. I mean, currently there are reports that it sells it at huge discounts to China and India in order to get it through there. And I also know that both the Foreign Office and the Treasury work tirelessly to close any loopholes that's brought to their attention, whether that's brought to the attention by members or anyone else, the law enforcement agencies. I think Russia has shown itself at being adept in these loopholes. But we do see in the Russian industrial base, it is now struggling in some of its rearming of its equipment because so much of its subsystems seem to have come from the West that now it's finding it hard, definitely, to resupply itself.
John Speller.
Mr. Speaker, the announcement about new munitions to Ukraine is very welcome, but we also need reassurance that his department will be able to restock. So can he tell us what they're doing to ramp up and sustain production capacity, including supply chains, not only to support Ukraine until the end of this conflict, but also to ensure restocking for our own armed forces?
The right honourable gentleman has asked, and consistently asks, and he is right that we have to keep restocking ourselves. Some of the restocking has started in the NLAWs. You remember the very first gifting that has started a few months ago. Also the areas of the low and high velocity anti-aircraft missiles. On 155s, I'm hoping to be able to inform the House in June that we would have placed a long and enduring contract in the UK to replace our 155 shells, which of course one of this conflict exposes is that you need those type of fires available. So it is important. It's important. The Treasury gave me in the autumn 560 million for some of that refurbishment, but also other funding at the latest budget, which I will of course make sure is spent in keeping our forces refurbished.
Well, Francois.
Thank you, sir. We have led Western Europe in supplying kit to the Ukrainians, ably administered by MOD equipment, defence equipment and support, it should be noted, but we haven't yet sent jets. Despite the fact we've got a squadron of Tranche 1 Typhoon sitting in a hangar, and despite the fact that President Zelensky very publicly called in Westminster Hall recently for us to do that. Secretary of State knows from his own experience that when this long-awaited counterattack begins, those Ukrainian brigades must have local air superiority over the battlefield in order to succeed, and what is left of the Ukrainian Air Force is far too small to do it on their own. So can I ask him specifically, what are we doing, A, to send jets, and B, what are we doing to encourage other Western allies to send them MiG-29s, F-16s or even A-10s, because it would be a tragedy, literally, if the counter-offensive ran out of momentum because it lacked air support.
My right honourable friend is right to talk about how you may maintain momentum and needing air support because, of course, while the Russian army has been very, very badly decimated, its air force, a significant part of its air force remains in a good condition, and therefore it is vital that that air attack potential is minimised. On particular jets, we offered, as you know, to the Ukrainians training on Typhoons. I recently received a letter turning that off as a request and asking us for support on the F-16, which of course we don't hold. However, I would encourage anybody to gift F-16s to help the Ukrainians, and in the meantime, we already use some of our funding and support to buy spares for the likes of the MiGs and everything else if that is required, because the other challenge this year is going to be sustainability. A lot of equipment has been gifted, huge numbers of Russian tanks have been captured. If we can refurbish and sustain them, then of course that's the best way and quickest way for Ukraine to continue its fight. So we need to keep its air force flying, but however on the F-16 I'm very happy to encourage any of my colleagues to donate them, and if they do, we'll happily move them.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, I'm very grateful both for advance sight of the statement and for its substance. 2 days ago, the Washington Post reported that the UK, quote, now appears poised to send Kyiv the long-range missiles that the Biden administration has long denied it. What is the United States government's position on the UK's decision to supply this deep strike capability?
I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman. The issue I take with the Wall Street Journal is the US have not denied Ukraine longer range. They put in the HIMARS and indeed some other Western systems. The difference is the ATACMS, which is a different type of munition. It's not a sort of deep strike. The Storm Shadow has the capacity to hit below ground. It's like it can go into a bunker type thing, and an ATACMS is more of an area weapon system. So it's a different weapon system. You know, the Americans have been clear on its donations or not at the moment considering that donations. As far as the use or the donation or gifting of Storm Shadow, the United States have been incredibly supportive on the United Kingdom's decision to do so.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his very sobering statement? The sheer scale of atrocities against civilians is horrific. It's heartbreaking that over 23,000 civilians have been wounded or killed. Last month, UNICEF told us that now the number of children who've been killed is over 500, and we must not forget the thousands of children who have been kidnapped by the Russian child catchers. Given the attacks on medical facilities and the level of casualties, can my right honourable friend update us on what medical support the UK has been giving to Ukraine?
Yes, my right honourable friend sitting next to me, the Minister for Defence, Personnel and Veterans, and himself a naval surgeon, has been incredibly proactive in coordinating and supporting that. Met a number of times with the Ukrainian Surgeon General and will again soon. We have provided training and equipment, certainly in the healthcare for the medical, including rehabilitation, but also alongside in the Department of Health has been able to support, and I'm very happy to write to the Honourable Lady with the details of the sort of pure civilian medical help and assistance we have given, but that often is around things like generators, ambulances, and other medical supplies.
Barker.
Deputy Speaker, the Defence Secretary himself has said that the Conservatives have hollowed out and underfunded our armed forces. So why is the Defence Secretary still pushing ahead with further cuts to the British Army by 10,000 troops and £2 billion real terms cuts in day-to-day MOD spending, which means less money for forces' pay, recruitment and families?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it would be good if the Honourable Lady actually quoted me correctly. I didn't say the Conservatives, I said successive governments, including her own, for the last 30 years have hollowed out the armed forces, and that's why we need to rectify it. It's why we got £24 billion recently and an extra £5 billion at the last election, not last budget, not only to refurbish, but also to modernise our armed forces. Get the quote right next. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Storm Shadow is a potent weapon, so I cautiously welcome the announcement today on the basis of what the Secretary of State has reported to the House. I'm also reassured by the undertaking that Storm Shadow will only be used to prosecute targets inside Ukraine. Why? Because NATO's aim has to be to eject Russia from Ukraine, not to wage war against Russia. My point is this: can I also ask him, please, in the same way that Challenger 2 preempted the deployment of Abrams and Leopard 2, could we assume in this particular case that the deployment of Storm Shadow might preempt other medium and long-range weapons being deployed from other NATO nations? And also, could he specifically answer, please, what it will take for F-16s to be deployed?
Well, first of all, my honourable friend, there are other nations with similar but not exactly the same type of weapon system, and I have seen already our next bidding round for the international fund will include deep strike and long-range fires that we will procure through this international fund, which includes Sweden and Norway and the Netherlands, etc. on that fund. So there is more to come from both the markets and depending on what gifting. What we would say is that the assessment of the gifting we've so far planning to give of Storm Shadow, and Mr. Deputy Speaker, I won't say for operational reasons the exact number, is currently enough to satisfy the Ukrainian demand for that capability. We'll keep that under review to make sure we can make the difference.
Shannon.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the Secretary of State's statement today, and can also commend him for his very, very strong and determined leadership. He reflects what we all want him to do, and he does it very well. Thank him for that. President Zelensky has stated this very morning that Ukraine needs much more time to prepare to launch the highly anticipated counter-offensive against Russia, as the military still needs the Western aid that has been promised. And the Secretary of State has indicated some of those things that are happening to prevent further loss of life. What immediate steps will the Foreign Office take to deliver the much-needed announced vehicles to assist Ukraine push back Russia as they intensify their attacks in Donetsk Oblast?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I think none of us should underestimate the political weight on the shoulders of the President of Ukraine. It's easy for us here in our safety of London and behind an alliance of 30 in NATO to forget that he is going to have to make a decision at some stage in this year to send men and women of their armed forces across minefields towards machine gun posts to take back their sovereign territory. And I think it is, there will be no easy way to predict when they'll do that. And he has to balance that with also an economy deliberately destroyed by Russia that he is also going to have to balance. So I wish them well in that. We will continue to support them to the end, in my view. It's what I believe and we stand for. We will keep supporting them. What I can say is, if he delays because he's waiting for the equipment, I would understand that fully. We'll do everything we can to make sure everything gifted is in the right place at the right time. So when he makes that decision, those men and women have the best chance of survival.
Good Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I draw attention to my entry in the Register of Members' interests. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and announcement, and he set out a list of atrocities which surely shames Putin and Russia. I've seen for myself in Ukraine how evilly and deviously landmines and other booby traps are contrived in order to cause the maximum casualty and danger to civilians. So will my right honourable friend confirm that the UK Government will continue to support the day-to-day work of the Halo Trust and the Mine Action Group in the removal of these mines, because they are the imminent threat on a day-to-day basis to so many civilians?
Yes, the Halo Trust is an amazing organisation. I think first founded under the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and that's where its pedigree comes from. I met recently some people who had been working in the Halo Trust in Ukraine. It's ongoing now, but long after this is over, I know they will be there, and the government will do everything it can to support them, whether that's through the Ministry of Defence or the Foreign Office and other departments.
Margaret Ferrier.
Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. Before 2022, the Ukrainian army uniform had not been adapted for women's bodies. Today, women form about 23% of the army in Ukraine, and roughly 7,000 are fighting on the front line. Does the Minister agree that the bravery of these women should be recognised? And what support has the government provided Ukraine to ensure that female soldiers have the equipment that they need?
The Honourable Lady makes a really important point, and indeed when my honourable friend, the member for Wrexham, did her report about women in the armed forces, one of the main recommendations for our armed forces was making sure we're buying equipment for women and not just a sort of for all in that sense, and we have started to do that, and as such our industry has become some of the industry leaders in that area, and as a result some of the work and gifting to Ukraine reflects exactly that, to make sure they get something specific for them that makes it easier to live in those trenches and survive. Thanks for prompting me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because when I go to Salter Plain in about 25 minutes, I shall make sure we get a catch-up with the training of Ukraine and find out if they're still getting those uniforms.
Speaker, and can I thank my honourable friend for the update he's given us today and for all of the work he's doing, which is absolutely tremendous. I spent a very short time, just a few days in Ukraine earlier this year, and saw the devastation coming from the illegal invasion. He touched on Operation Interflex. Is he able to say any more about how that work is progressing? Thank you.
Yes, I took the First Lady of Ukraine to Interflex last week. We have nearly 700 foreign troops helping from Australia, New Zealand, most of the Scandinavians and the Dutch, alongside about 750 British troops. We have trained 9,000 plus last year and are on course to do 20,000 this year. We've now expanded at the request of Ukrainians, not just to do basic training, but we're now training non-commissioned officers and indeed have just started last week platoon commanders courses. So we're starting in the development of the low-level leadership that you need to start to rebuilding your armed forces. We expect to continue to get requests. We've had another request to expand the training. We are absolutely in the middle of it. I'll be having a conversation about that this afternoon, and I hope to have more to announce to the House later.
I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for Defence for his statement today and for responding to questions for over 3/4 of an hour. Royal Assent. I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that His Majesty has signified his royal assent to the following Act: Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act 2023. Before I call the Secretary of State to make his statement on transport, Mr. Speaker has given a statement that he has repeatedly made clear that the House should be told first when government is making any important announcements, and he is extremely disappointed that there has been extensive press coverage this morning about these developments.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's actually a very helpful point for you to have made on behalf of Mr. Speaker. And as you know, I completely agree with that. This, of course, is, as I hear some chuntering from over the other side, but they should understand this. Once we notified first group of my decision, there was obviously market-sensitive information that they were obligated by law to disclose to the stock exchange as soon as the markets opened this morning. And that meant the decision was in the public domain. We issued a press notice, but other than that, no other information has been put into the public domain. And I've therefore kept all of our remarks until the House was able to be updated. But in market-sensitive cases, I know Mr. Speaker will understand that there are certain things that do have to be disclosed to the outside world and aren't able to wait until being notified to the House. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me start by thanking the entire transport industry and officials across government for their professionalism and hard work over the last weekend. Tens of thousands of people travelled to Windsor and central London for the coronation of His Majesty King Charles III and Her Majesty Queen Camilla. Getting the public around efficiently and safely took months of planning and preparation, and special thanks must go to Great Western Railways for putting on additional services, as well as Network Rail and South Western Railways, who facilitated the biggest movement of military personnel by the rail industry in over 50 years for the coronation. It meant people from across the UK, indeed around the world, were able to unite in celebration during what was a truly historic moment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my most recent oral statement to the House, I made clear the government's commitment to deliver a railway that works for passengers, businesses and the taxpayer, and where services are not up to scratch, we're holding operators to account, and where there are systemic weaknesses in the industry, we're pushing ahead with reform. So I wish to update the House today with our progress, starting with the future operator of the TransPennine Express contract. Since I took office, I've been clear that First TPE service levels have for too long been unacceptable. Passengers, including many honourable and right honourable members across this House, have faced significant disruption, including regular cancellations and poor levels of communication. The underlying reasons behind this vary, but what's clear is the twin challenges of COVID and industrial action have left their mark. First TPE's driver training backlog now stretches to nearly 4,000 days, which means that at any one time it can only draw upon 80% of its total driver workforce. Adding to this, a breakdown in relations between the operator and the driver union ASLEF, and all told, there simply haven't been enough drivers to run the planned timetable. Inevitably, passengers have borne the brunt, facing cancellation rates of up to 23% on Monday to Friday services and gaps in services on some routes of up to 6 hours. That clearly isn't good enough. A point I have made directly with First Group, which owns First TPE, and which my honourable friend, the Rail Minister, has made in weekly meetings with the Rail North Partnership, where Transport for the North jointly manage First TPE's contract with the Department for Transport. We will always hold operators to account for matters within their control, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We'll give them a chance to put things right, but despite a recovery plan put in place since February, there remain significant challenges underpinned by ASLEF's distinct lack of cooperation. To achieve the performance levels I expect that passengers deserve and that the northern economy needs, it's clear that both the contract and the underlying relationships must be reset. And I have therefore decided not to renew or extend First TPE's contract when it ends on the 28th of May. Instead, I am exercising my operator of last resort duties and directly awarding a new TPE contract to a public sector operator who will operate it on my behalf. As Transport Secretary, my obligation first and foremost is to secure passenger rail services on which TPE passengers can rely. That requires a new approach, one which the OLR is best placed to deliver in these circumstances. And most significantly, it provides an opportunity to reset relations between management and all stakeholders, from passengers to trade unions. I've also asked my officials to review services in the north to help drive efficiency and find better ways to deliver for passengers across the region. And I will ask all interested parties, including the Northern Mayors and Transport for the North, to engage with the government on this work. Now, whilst today's decision will be welcomed by many, and whilst it shows a government alive to the concerns of passengers, as my honourable friend, the Rail Minister, and I have made clear, it would be misguided for anyone to think this is an instant solution. The problems First TPE faced won't disappear overnight. Any operator facing industrial action and a union-coordinated ban on overtime working will struggle to run a reliable service. So I invite those who have long called for today's decision, including unions, Northern Mayors and colleagues across the House, to work constructively with me and my honourable friend, the Rail Minister, to fix the underlying problems and help return service levels to where they should be. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, the OLR is just the next stop on the line It's not the terminus station, and once market conditions allow, we intend to subject this, and indeed all contracts, both private sector and those under the OLR, to competitive tendering. Mr. Speaker, there will be some, unfortunately, who use today's decision to further their ideological ends, to argue that this somehow justifies all rail contracts being brought under public control. That would be a mistake. The majority of taxpayers do not use the railways regularly, but they could be saddled with the huge cost of nationalisation, only to inherit the industry's problems with no plan to fix them. Nationalisation is a soundbite, not a solution, and this government will always be guided by the evidence to help make the best decisions for passengers, which is why earlier this year, having seen the noticeable improvements on Avanti West Coast, I resisted calls to bring the franchise into public ownership. I extended Avanti's contract by 6 months, a decision vindicated, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with Avanti calls cancellation rates at the end of March falling to 1.4% from 13.2% in January, and continuing to improve despite ongoing challenges. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to industrial action. For months, the Rail Minister and I have worked hard to change the tone of the dispute and help facilitate fair and reasonable pay offers for workers. But in negotiations with train operating companies, the RMT and ASLEF are refusing to even put those pay offers to a vote of their members, despite RMT members who work for Network Rail voting overwhelmingly to accept a similar deal earlier this year. Instead, the RMT have balloted for yet more industrial action, and along with ASLEF, both have cynically called strikes that will cripple the network during the Eurovision Song Contest this week. We're hosting Eurovision because last year's winner, Ukraine, can't. It will be an event attended by displaced Ukrainians that have fled Putin's war, and the House has just been hearing about that threat, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So it beggars belief why unions have chosen to disrupt such an internationally symbolic event, one that not only presents a united front against Russia's aggression, but shows solidarity with Ukraine's resistance. So my message on behalf of fed-up passengers is to say to the union leaders, call off your strikes, put the fair and reasonable pay offers to a vote, and give your members a say on their future. With or without union support, the industry must modernise to avoid permanent decline. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're building unstoppable momentum towards rail reform. As I set out in my Bradshaw address in February, I announced that Derby will be the location for GBR's new headquarters, and today I can report progress against the commitment I made to extend single-leg pricing to the rest of the LNER network. Tickets will go on sale from May the 14th for travel from June the 11th, and it means LNER passengers will benefit from simpler, more flexible and better value ticketing, removing the frustration that a single ticket can cost almost as much as a return. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, since becoming Transport Secretary, my approach has been to listen to the experts, weigh up the evidence and make decisions in the interests of the travelling public. Today's announcements show a government tuned into the concerns of passengers in the north, unafraid to take tough decisions to deliver better services, and relentlessly focused on modernising our railways whilst protecting passengers from the effects of industrial action. That's what the British people deserve. It's what we're delivering, and I commend this statement to the House. Louise Haigh.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. Mr. Deputy Speaker, after years of comprehensive failure, after tens of millions in taxpayer cash has been handed to an operator so clearly not fit for purpose, after needless damage has been wrought on our northern economy, and more than 6 months after Labour demanded it, the Tories have finally accepted that they can no longer defend the indefensible. They have seen the writing on the wall. And the only question passengers will be asking today is, what stopped the Secretary of State taking action sooner? How on earth did it take this long? Let's just be clear about the failure that until now has been allowed to go on unchecked. This operator has broken records for cancellations. Almost 1 in 5 services last year did not run. Fewer than half the services were on time. And it's not just been an issue for the last few months, as ministers claim, but for years. 7 years ago, well before COVID, TransPennine Express had exactly the same staff shortages they suffer from today. They failed to address the issues that passengers are still experiencing. that they managed to keep this contract for so long, to be told only months ago they were in line for an 8-year extension, is extraordinary. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, the difficult truth for the Secretary of State today is this. His decision shines an unforgiving light on the fractured railways his party are responsible for. This endless cycle of private operators having to be taken over shows the rail system is fundamentally broken. The comprehensive failure of TransPennine Express is not a bug in the system, it is a feature of it. Since the Conservatives came to office, the East Coast franchise collapsed and was taken over. Northern Rail followed, then London and South Eastern. Mr Deputy Speaker, for the Conservatives to have nationalised one railway may be regarded as misfortune. To have nationalised 4 demonstrates something much more fundamental. The privatised model they have rigidly lauded in the face of all evidence is collapsing. Passengers see services get visibly, demonstrably worse, while hundreds of millions in taxpayers' money is handed to shareholders without the faintest hint of competition. How much longer will people be asked to rely on a system that so routinely fails? His decision today must just be the start. The Secretary of State now needs to show the leadership that has been so sorely lacking, to stop casting around and blaming everyone but themselves. Will he set out to the House the immediate plan to address the long-standing issues of recruitment, training and rest day working? And what steps is he taking to end the industrial dispute that has now been ongoing for over a year? Can he confirm when he last held talks with the employers and the unions to bring the dispute to an end? Strike action is imminent, but he still has opportunity to avoid it. So can it really therefore be the case that he has not met with the unions and employers for more than 5 months? If that is correct, it is a truly shocking dereliction of duty. The Secretary of State's decision today must be the start of something more fundamental. He can choose to continue with this charade, to entrench the fragmentation that his proposed reforms will deliver. Or he can accept that he has been wrong and bring the remaining operators into public ownership. He can end this broken system that is failing passengers, bring track and train together, speed up fare reform and deliver a simpler, unified railway. Today's decision makes that case more obvious than ever. Services have literally never been worse, and for too long, the Tory solution has been more of the same. The entire country should not have to put up with this for a second longer. It's time for fundamental change, and it's time to deliver the rail service that Britain deserves.
Well, first of all, Mr Deputy Speaker, the point that the Honourable Lady makes about the timing is very straightforward. The contract that TP has expires on the 28th of May. And I noticed, Mr Deputy Speaker, this morning, the Honourable Lady, in another flip-flopping of Labour's policy, knows that the contract expiry is a sensible point at which to take decisions because that's the point that she's going to nationalise rail services, is waiting for the contracts to expire. So actually, I think that's a rather faux complaint. On her more substantive point, on industrial action, I'll set my position out very clearly. When I took this job, I changed the tone of the debate. I met the rail union leaders, and I ensured that the employers were facilitated to make fair and reasonable offers. On Network Rail, a fair and reasonable offer was made of pay and reform, importantly reform, Mr Deputy Speaker, which is how these offers are being funded. That was put to the members of the RMT who work for Network Rail, and it was overwhelmingly accepted. Not my words, the RMT's own words. 90% turnout, 76% in favour. Fair and reasonable offers have been made by the train operating companies under their umbrella group, the Rail Delivery Group, to RMT members working for the train operating companies, broadly comparable offers in value, also with reform. The RMT, for reasons that I really don't understand, has refused to put those offers to their members, Mr Deputy Speaker. So offers are on the table, they're waiting to be put to their members, and they won't put those offers to their members. ASLEF have an offer on the table which would take the average salary of a train driver from around £60,000 a year to £65,000 a year. So I've been doing my job. Offers are on the table. Offers are on the table. They need to be put to the members of those unions so they can make a decision. The focus, though, Mr Deputy Speaker, and that's my final point, from the Honourable, is not really surprising because, of course, the rail unions have donated a total of just over £1 million, £1 million to the Labour Party, or Labour office holders, over the last 5 years. The General Secretary of ASLEF is chair of Labour unions, the group of unions affiliated to the Labour Party, and sits on Labour's national executive. And the Honourable Lady said that she would be working hand in glove with you about ASLEF. What I would say to her is what you should do is suggest to them that they use this opportunity to do rest day working, Well, I have said those, I have made those points to the unions, but if she's working hand in glove with them and tell them to call off their strike at the weekend, stop focusing on damaging the Eurovision contest we host for Ukraine, and work in hand in glove with them. And if she fails to do so, people will see she's all talk and no action.
Holly Mumby-Croft.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend will know that the TP level of service has caused absolute havoc for my constituents. I've had people struggling to get to college, people struggling to get to work. So can I congratulate him for his leadership and for this decision? I'm really, really glad that he has taken this step. And I know my mum will be as well, as she was stranded by TransPennine Express a few months ago. I understand it's not a silver bullet. It will take time, and of course he will have my support. But can he say a little more about when he expects the level of service to reach the levels that my constituents in Scunthorpe deserve? Thank you.
Grateful to my honourable friend, as she of course has over a long period raised these issues on behalf of her constituents, and I thank her for doing it. As I said in my statement, Mr Deputy Speaker, we're not going to see overnight change. I think this is an important decision to reset those relationships. How quickly we can improve services will depend on the response of others to those reset relationships and the use that the new management of the company, how it uses that. I hope we will see early results, but I have been clear to the House, both when I made my previous statement on Avanti and today, that there isn't a magic wand, but I hope this is an opportunity to reset those relationships and get things moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Back in January, I said to the Rail Minister that in the prior week, TransPennine Express could not point to a single day when it ran the emergency timetable. The improvements have been glacial, and the Government have finally taken action so many of us called for some time ago. TransPennine blamed anyone but themselves, including workers and the unions, for the chronically poor service. The truth is, it remains the worst performer, and action had to be taken. It is good, Mr Deputy Speaker, to see another English-based operator nationalised. Slowly but surely, the UK Government is following in Scotland's footsteps. Now, he said nationalisation is a soundbite, not a solution. This despite it being the actual solution the Government has gone for. But I would gently say to him that privatisation has been a bourach, not a benefit. And of course we welcome the Government following the lead of the Scottish Government in nationalising underperforming rail service, and would note that this means the anti-nationalisation Tory party has now nationalised 4 rail services in 5 years. They're as confused as the leader of the opposition, who pledged to nationalise the railway, then seemed to recently backtrack on it. It's at the very least hit signal failures. Only 10% of people in the UK support private ownership of the railway. Even amongst Tory voters, only 13% support privatised railways. The UK Government's privatisation obsession is out of step not only with the wider public, but also their own voters' desires. So isn't it time for the Government to listen to the experts, listen to the workers, and listen to the voters, and end the failed experiment of privatisation? And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, despite involving disputes involving unions and the Scottish Government were resolved very quickly. Yet Scots passengers have faced disruption due to this Government's unwillingness and inability to resolve disputes. So why does the Secretary of State think that Scotland has managed to resolve strikes so much more efficiently than this Government?
There were two substantive questions there, Mr Deputy Speaker, so let me deal with both of them. First of all, I'll accept his welcome for my decision. I think there was a welcome there. On his point about industrial action, if you're going to reach a deal, it does take two to reach a deal. From our side of it, fair and reasonable offers have been put on the table. And as I said, they are fair and reasonable. They're broadly in line with the offers that were made to the RMT staff that work for Network Rail, which, when they were put to the members of the union, were accepted overwhelmingly, with a 90% turnout and 76% in favour. Similar value offers with reform have been made to RMT staff have been working for the train operating companies and have not been put to the members. So the clear outstanding issue is not a new offer, but it's for the offers to be put to the members of the trade unions to enable them to make a decision. And there's an offer on the table to train drivers as well who are in the ASLEF union. That has not been put to their members either, and as I said, it would take their average salaries to £65,000 a year. I think that's an offer at least worth putting to them. That's the outstanding piece of work that needs to take place. And as I said, we've done our bit of that job. The reason why the Scottish Government reached conclusions, I think, was because it caved in, it's not delivered reform, and I think it's overpaid with taxpayers' money. There's a balance to strike here about fair and reasonable offers that are fair to the workers in the industry, the passengers that it serves, but also to the taxpayer, and that is a responsibility I take very seriously.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've repeatedly called out in this chamber the appalling levels of service which my constituents at Lockerbie Station have received over a long period of time from TransPennine Express, and the failure of the management there to address those issues. So I very much, and my constituents very much, welcome this decision, because they had no confidence that TransPennine would be able to turn the situation down. As he says, this is a reset where all the stakeholders, including those in Scotland, can come together so that passengers can have the level of service that they both need and expect. Can he expand a little on what he will be doing to ensure that that reset can produce those results?
Gladly, and my right honourable friend indeed has raised this issue on a number of occasions. Just to start, first of all, my officials will of course be working with officials in the Scottish Government, and I this morning spoke to Kevin Stewart, MSP, who's the Scottish Transport Minister, to explain the decision, to explain that we will be working with the Scottish Government on looking at the services that are currently in OLR, cover the whole of the north of England, and obviously cross-border services as well, which are very important to my right honourable friend. I also spoke with the elected mayors in the north of England that cover these areas to explain the decision, and also to confirm that we were working closely with them on the best possible pattern of services going forward. And I hope that demonstrates the government's intention to use this reset moment as constructively as possible, and I hope everyone else responds in like manner.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I refer the House to my register of interest as a proud trade union member. It's really interesting to hear the Secretary of State talk about renewal dates, because in March 2023, when the shambolic Avanti West Coast contract was renewed, 9.1% of its services were cancelled. In the same month, only 6.6% of TransPennine services were cancelled. So why is he only punishing some operators for their failures and not others? And isn't it time to fix the broken system once and for all, and put his own ideology aside and embrace Labour's plans to bring our railways into public ownership?
Well, I think I answered that question in my statement, if the Honourable Lady was listening. When I made my earlier statement about Avanti, I resisted calls to bring it into public ownership for very good reason. They were delivering on their recovery plan, and I said I, at that time, had confidence that they would continue to do so when I extended it by 6 months. Since I did that, their cancellation rates caused by them have fallen to 1.4% from the 13.2% in January. They're continuing to improve, demonstrating that that was the correct decision, and I was right not to listen to calls from the party opposite to do the opposite.
Sir Edward Lee.
The difficulties of people living in Grimsby and Cleethorpes to access London via Doncaster, via TransPennine, surely undermines the importance, does it not, of our campaign, led by myself, my excellent honourable friend here for Cleethorpes, to get a new service run by LNER direct to London from Grimsby and Cleethorpes through my constituency of Market Raise and Lincoln. Much better route. We're absolutely delighted with this excellent rail minister who's been listening to us, but we want the rail minister's boss to give him full support and get this service, not least because rural people demand a better service.
Grateful for my honourable friend's question, and I know he's met with the rail minister with colleagues to talk about these services, and the rail minister has been keeping me updated about it. I know further work is going to continue, and we will of course do our best, as we always do, to try and keep my honourable friend happy.
Stephen Dowdy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State will of course be aware that there are many constituents across the country who don't have access to any rail services at all, and of course that's the case for residents in the east of Cardiff, where I've been a long-term campaigner for a station to be built at St Mellons, and indeed benefit the constituents of my honourable friend on the front bench from Cardiff Central as well. But there are crucial works that need to be done to make that a reality, including relief lines on that line, and also the connection that he visited, the proposed connection between Cardiff Central and indeed Cardiff Bay to improve services there. Would he meet with me to discuss how we can move those projects along and get improved rail services for my constituents?
The honourable gentleman quite rightly speaks out for his constituents, and I remember when we announced the Levelling Up Fund bid for the connection between Cardiff Central and Cardiff Bay, he welcomed it on behalf of his constituents and the city he represents. Either I or the Rail Minister will be very pleased to meet him to discuss what more we can do to deliver services. I'm very keen that we deliver improved rail services across the whole of the United Kingdom, and we'll do what we can to help.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome our right honourable friend's decision. To have renewed the franchise would have been to reward failure. The TransPennine service between Cleethorpes and Manchester over the last 18 months, on a good day could be said to be unreliable, and on a bad day totally appalling. And I would very much agree with my right honourable friend that now is the time for the unions to step forward and let's get round the table and reach agreement on rest day working so that my constituents can have a proper hourly service between Cleethorpes and Manchester, which is what TransPennine should have been providing for the last 18 months.
Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend for that comment. He's another colleague who's been raising these issues on a regular basis. It is important to recognise this is an opportunity for people to respond accordingly. What's disappointing, Mr Deputy Speaker, and my honourable friend referred to the opportunity for the unions to agree a new rest day working contract. Of course, the cynical way they behaved is ASLEF agreed that rest day working contract and then immediately said it was going to be taking action sort of a strike and withdrew any cooperation at all. Now, I hope that they will respond to this decision in the right way. It's an opportunity to reset those relationships and do what we're all supposed to do, which is deliver a better railway for the passengers that use it, and I hope they take that opportunity. If they do, they will find a willing partner in me.
Vera Hobhouse.
Mr Deputy Speaker, rail companies across the country are failing rail customers. Fare hikes, cancellations and delays. GWR, which I use between Bath and London, is no better. Between July and October 2022, GWR saw an increase of 179% of delay compensation claims compared to the previous year. The government has promised to fix the system and create Great British Railways in law. When?
Well, I'm very familiar with the GWR service, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I use it frequently myself. There have been a number of problems on the western route, not actually, to be fair, often caused by GWR, but caused by Network Rail. But I accept that inconveniences passengers just the same, partly why we're bringing together track and train together under GBR. And I will continue having that focus on performance. And in fact, I'm seeing the leadership team at Network Rail today, and in fact one of the things that we're going to be talking about is their performance on the western routes, and I will raise the Honourable Lady's specific concerns with them this afternoon.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have spoken to the Rail Minister on many occasions about my concerns about the service of Avanti train and also Arriva Trains Wales. But when many services are cancelled, we are informed that they are due to staff illness or sickness and people not turning up to work. Why are there such extraordinary high levels of sickness in this sector? And what is he doing to work with trade unions and the bosses of train companies to understand that and to deal with it?
So my honourable friend raises some very good points on behalf of his constituents, and he's recently had an update by way of a written answer about some of the issues on his services, about services being withdrawn by Transport for Wales, and also some of the infrastructure issues, and I hope that was helpful. On his specific question about workforce, I've made it very clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want a thriving, successful railway with increasing patronage and increasing revenue coming in through the fare box, and I want high-quality, well-paid jobs. We're not going to see those things happening if we don't drive up patronage, and we're not going to see that if there's continued industrial action. So I repeat what I said. If the unions put the pay deal to their members, let's see what the members think. The sooner we can settle these disputes and have the rail service being successful in attracting new customers, the better for everyone, those working in it and those using it.
Secretary Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State says the government evaluate the evidence to do best for our railways. Yet TransPennine Express is now the fourth operator in 5 years to have its contract cancelled for failing passengers. When will he accept the evidence shows that the only way to fix the broken system is Labour's plan to bring our railways into public ownership?
Well, the Honourable Lady, I'm glad she talked about the evidence. The Honourable Lady is not right when she talks about the other services that were brought into OLR. They weren't brought into the operator of last resort because of their failures for passenger services. It was largely on financial issues that they were brought in. This is the first one, actually, where it's been brought into the OLR for failing to deliver appropriate passenger services. And as I said, I don't take decisions for ideological reasons. I look at the evidence, and I will always be motivated by making the right decisions for passengers. That's what these services are designed to deliver, and that's what I will always put first.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I welcome the announcement. However, this should have happened months ago in terms of the operator of last resort. As a regular user of the Avanti West Coast mainline, services have improved, but they're still really, really bad. So just how many more second chances do Avanti deserve, and how many, when is the Secretary of State going to say enough is enough and to take the contract away from them?
So on Avanti, I mean, I don't think the honourable gentleman is right. The services have improved. Yeah. They're not everywhere completely where they need to be, but they're now up with the rest of the industry, and they do need to continue to improve. I made that clear when I extended their contract. I said they had made progress and they needed to continue it. Clearly, I will have to make a decision later this year about what we do when it comes up for renewal again, and it will depend, as it did last time, on their performance. I hope they will continue to keep increasing their performance and demonstrating that they can deliver for passengers, and that will be important when I come to make that decision.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Minister mentions Avanti in his statement and the improvements that they are apparently making, but my constituent Zoe contacted me to say that she's been trying to book an advanced single standard premium ticket from London and Euston to Glasgow for weeks. She needs it for the end of this month. and while she can book her ticket to London, she can't come back home again because those tickets haven't been released yet. What kind of service is that? If people can't predict how they can get home, how can that possibly build confidence in the service and have people travelling?
Well, I obviously don't know what's happened in this specific example. If the Honourable Lady will give the details to my Honourable friend, the Rail Minister, we'll look into that specific case. But if you look at their performance overall, they have made considerable progress, both early this year, but also since I extended their contract. And as I said in answer to the previous question, I want to see that performance continue to improve on behalf of constituents just like the Honourable Ladies.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Many of my constituents in South Manchester will be breathing a sigh of relief that there's finally light at the end of the tunnel in relation to the TransPennine services. But as my honourable friend set out so well earlier on, they're not the only company that are failing passengers. He says that he doesn't think public ownership is the answer, so what is the answer to these failing operators? And when will we see the government come forward with a proper plan for the fundamental reform and improvement of these operators that we need?
Well, yes, I set out in my George Bradshaw address earlier this year a clear plan which was published in the white paper on bringing together track and train in GBR, so there is a guiding mind to look at the overall structure of the industry. And also I announced the headquarters of GBR will be in Derby, which was welcomed. And we'll continue making progress to deliver on that plan, which I think is the right plan to have a successful, thriving rail industry, both for passenger customers, but also importantly for freight customers. And we're going to set a target later this year to move a certain amount of freight off of our roads onto our railways, both good for railways and good for our environment.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Across the Humber, we welcome this announcement today, but I think many fed-up passengers will say, after years of terrible service, why has it taken so long? Can I just ask the Minister to confirm as well that this will mean that the penny pinching and mismanagement by TPE of our beautiful Victorian Paragon rail station in Hull and the 5-year saga of the substandard toilets they installed will be over? And will the Minister also agree to meet with Humber MPs and businesses to discuss the rail electrification, which is still missing from the Integrated Rail Review, and projects like the reinstallation of the line between Hull and York?
So, first of all, I'm grateful the Honourable Lady has welcomed the decision today, and it is a moment where I think we can reset relationships to improve services for her constituents. On her specific question about the toilets at the station, I don't have the details to hand, but that request and her specific request to meet with MPs from the Humber area, I will make sure the Rail Minister responds accordingly and gets that meeting set up, at which she can discuss that issue and other colleagues can discuss appropriate issues for their areas.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Privatisation has led to the break-up between not just track and train, but infrastructure, such as Luton Station. I'm thankful that the Rail Minister visited. He's seen it for himself, and he knows that I'm very passionate to stand up for my constituents, that we will soon be getting our lifts installed. But the leaks in the roof have impacted the small local business as well as the cafe services, and commuters cannot get their cup of tea in the morning. Despite that, the small businesses moved back into the leaking roof part in order to survive. So can I ask the Minister to please press upon Network Rail to at least fix the leaks in the roof at the station, if nothing else?
My honourable friend, the Rail Minister, I know, visited that as she set out, and I think went to that very cafe. As she knows, we're very keen on making sure we fix the roof while the sun is shining. So I will talk to the Rail Minister and see if we can make some progress on making sure that station is in an appropriate state for her and her constituents.
John Trickett.
And my constituents in Yorkshire are brassed off with the fact that public transport is so badly damaged that it's not available. There are 20,000 people in my area with no access to a private car, but only 3,000 are using public transport. It's because the government has got an ideological drive to privatisation, even though every time those private companies get into trouble, they then bring in the state to support it. And secondly, because they have a pathological hatred of the trade unions. Isn't it time that this government stood aside and made way for a different, better system which serves the public rather than the interests of a particular ideological group in the Tory party?
Secretary of State.
I think that question is so far removed from reality. I don't know where to start. On the first point, actually, the response to what's happened here is that the contract has not been extended and it's been taken into the operator of last resort because I think it's necessary to reset those relationships. On his second point about trade unions, that's fundamentally wrong. When I took this job, I decided it was important to change the tone of the debate. I met all of the rail union leaders. I have a perfectly constructive relationship with them. Yep. I facilitated fair and reasonable pay offers. We settled the dispute on Network Rail, which was overwhelmingly accepted by members of the RMT. There are fair and reasonable offers on the table for RMT members working for the train operating companies and the train drivers. All I hope for is that those offers get put to the members of the trade unions, the people the General Secretaries are supposed to work for, and allow the members to make a decision on what I believe are fair and reasonable pay offers.
Thank you.